I'd like to call the Special Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Monday, February the 15th, 5:30. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Would just like to amend the agenda, removing 4.4 as the report is not available at this time and will be available for the next Committee of the Whole budget meeting. If I could have a motion for the approval of the agenda as amended.
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item is the adoption of the Special Committee of the Whole Grant and Aid January the 26th, 2016 minutes.
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And now we have a presentation from West Shore Parks and Recreation. Sue Dixon.
Madam Chair, myself and Councillor Chong will be excusing ourselves due to a conflict of interest.
So the first slide is about our revenues, and you can see we had a 10.6%, almost $600,000 increase in revenues. So that was really strong growth in really all of our areas. Very pleased about that. Expenses were increased by about 4.9%, and a large portion of that was to do with wages and salaries. We had the 2% QP increase, and then also we were in a lot of our employer portion of PPP, EI, and the municipal pension, all of those increased as well. So that brought it up about 3.6%. Increases in hydro and water, we have those every year, more and more. But a decrease in natural gas, so that was a pleasant surprise. Other expenses remain substantially the same. So you can see the expenses, the majority of our expenses are our salaries and wages and benefits at, almost 66%. And then that's followed by utilities, the program costs, administration costs, that's like our insurance, IT, and that kind of thing. So our total major repairs and maintenance, $945K. So the majority of that is funded through municipal requisitions, but there was some from a CRD pool grant that we got unexpectedly at the end of last year. It had to do with the retirement of the debt for the pool. So we actually received close to $200,000 that can be used for the pool. So we'll be using that for the pool. And then we had some money coming from reserve. The LED retrofit, and I'll be showing you some pictures that are quite dramatic. So that cost $280K, but we'll get a grant from BC Hydro, so we'll have annual savings of 450 kilowatts. Centennial Center, we're going to put on a new roof and waterproof the fascia and new skirting, and that's going to cost $100,000, but we will continue to offer programs as well as the programs at Royal Bay and Belmont. At one time, we thought we would close the Centennial Center, but there seems to be a lot of demand for the programming there, so we're just going to keep doing it. The second stage of the heat reclaim is going to go in 2016, so that's where we're taking the energy that we used to do the ice at the JDF Arena and have it heat the pool. So it's kind of going to reclaim that, and so we're hoping that we'll save about $30,000 in natural gas when that is complete. So here's our requisitions. You can see where Langford does pay 50% of the requisition. requisitions. And then Colwood is the second at 22%. And then View Royal is the third. And then the other three are fairly small in comparison. Requisitions as a total, though, have been decreasing as more of our revenues are funded, self-funded from our revenues, and a less proportion comes from requisitions. So 44.3% is now funded by requisitions. And in most recreation centers, it's more like 60 to 75% that is funded through public funding. So as in requisitions, but we generate quite a bit of revenue, so that's good. And here's the pictures of our LED lights that we just are completing and will be doing more. So the darker picture is before LED lights in the JDF Arena, and then after, and it's quite noticeable. And the next one is the pool. Again, the one on the left with the old lighting and the new brighter one. So it really makes a big difference. And this is the turf in the velodrome. So that went in the spring, and it has really been used a lot, especially with this rainy weather. The fields are closed right now, I know, for the next few days. But this can be used a lot, and the cyclists can still use the exterior, so it's a very well-used part of West Shore. We did some stats. So we don't take for the majority of our things, well, like drop-ins, we can't say who comes from Colwood, who comes from Langford, and neither do we collect a lot from our user groups, like soccer and minor hockey. But we plan to do that in the future, so we get a better idea of exactly who's using our facility. But we do get the stats for pass holders. So you can see 43% are Langford, 24% Colwood. So, and then we have a 15% non-West Shore, and that's fairly common with all of the regional. If you may have someone that lives in the West Shore, but they work downtown, so they use a rec center there at their lunch hours, and vice versa. People that work out here that don't live here. There's our water fit. I think that was pre-LED lights. Program registration. So these are like all of our preschool and licensed programs. Again, you can see where Langford is 49% and Colwood is at 23%. So almost tracking to what your requisitions are. So you're getting good value for your money. There's an other there, 15% again, people out of the area. We did get for the senior center, and there's actually quite a large component, 30% is others. So that comes from, there's people that come from this Victoria and region into use our senior center because it's a very active center, lots of activity. And that's just a couple of pictures. The top one is our shamrocks. Their season will be starting pretty soon, and some advanced for the younger kids. Drop-in admissions. You can just see from 214 to 215, there's increase in every area, and that's been consistent for the last several years, where year after year we're still seeing increases. So it's a busy place. Oh, that's Walk the Shores. So Colwood's very involved in that production every summer. And then again, some of our younger kids, and this is summer camp, and we also do spring camp. So that was it. Unless you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Thank you very much. Does any of the committee have any questions? Councillor Day?
Thanks. I just had a question. I'm trying to get back to your slide. It was just before your expenses by category. You mentioned you're seeing a bit of an increase in hydro and in water,
Yes.
but a decrease in natural gas.
Yes.
And I was just curious, you might not know off the top of your head, and that's fine, but would be interested to know what your water demands might be, just in terms of, potential liaisons to possibly find some uses for reclaimed water.
Yes. Yeah, and we had a very dry summer. And we do have some well water, and we also have some of the ponds down below kind of where the golf course is that we do draw water from. But we did have to use like the CRD water. And we did kind of inquire with them whether we could get a different rate, a bulk rate or whatever, but we were told no, there's just kind of the one rate and we're paying that. And, with CRD water, it's kind of interesting because they still need the same amount of budget to operate. So even though you will save and use less water, they just up the rate, so they still get the same amount of money. So it's a little bit of, you can't really win.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from with the been on the Water Commission for a few years there, and I understand where they're coming from too. But there will be perhaps future needs. So I was just curious how much you had drawn upon their resources and whether or not there was an opportunity there.
Oh, I'm sure there is an opportunity. Yeah, we talked about it. Yeah, there was something, I think with the Dryden Park, there might have been something, and
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Excellent. And just wanted to congratulate you on your retrofit that you're going to be undertaking this year for the ice and the reduction that's going to bring for hydro savings. So it's great to see also great to see that you've noted your greenhouse gas reductions. I'm just really pleased to see that in your report.
Yeah, no, we're really, trying to do as much as we can.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, Sue. With the opening of Royal Bay and Belmont and the extra programming that goes along with that, do you know what the expenses were? The increase in expenses as a result of those two?
The fees that we're paying to the school district, so starting January 1 of this year, was I think $56,000. But I think we're going to definitely, there's a lot of programming that is going to be going on as well as the preschool, but there's also the adult evening stuff. And with Royal Bay Fields and the lights, and we, with Paulwood as well, gave a grant for that to be a turf field. So basically, Monday to Friday days, it's the schools, weekends and nights, it's kind of West Shore. And we've seen huge demand for that. And it was interesting, a lot of the, some of the managers went to a BCRPA meeting in Harrison Hot Springs, and that was one of the things that came out. Well, two things in that a lot of the municipalities are having shrinking usage of their facilities, so they're trying to, kind of work out how they manage that. And we're kind of in the enviable position that we're having this, growth year after year. So it's very kind of interesting and unusual. And then the other thing was with twinning and doing more with schools, because you can use the same infrastructure, like you use it, 7 days a week and longer hours a day, that definitely is a win-win for everybody. So we're certainly going along that route, and it's working well.
Yeah, I guess my point too, just looking at the total increase of 2.56%, given the increases in programming is,
Yes, it was,
and the challenges is pretty reasonable
yes,
from my perspective.
Yeah, and they're still kind of finding their way a little bit. Like they're not actually doing anything at Royal Bay right now because they just basically got in and they're just getting it set up. And so there's still a lot of planning on exactly, what they're going to offer and when. But preschool registration and early preschool registration. And it was like, yeah, lots and lots of registers. The interesting thing will to see what the why will be to our numbers.
Yeah.
But we're kind of thinking that there's just the demand out here that I think there's enough for everybody. So we'll see.
Well, the pool was packed when I was there on Saturday, so
Yeah.
I tell you, a little bit of capacity is probably a good thing.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I think about 5 years ago, the PERC report basically said like we were at overcapacity, that there definitely needed to be another pool out here. So I think there's a lot of residents that had to go into Commonwealth or something for their swim lessons, that they're usually just sold out.
And the final question, Madam Chair, we were quite involved with the new turf field in the Velodrome through field lacrosse.
Yes.
And so I was just wondering if there was going to be any additional capital improvements to the Velodrome site in the coming years. Just knowing, we've kind of gone through our growing
Right.
pains, right? First
Yes.
year of the turf,
Yes.
and knowing what perhaps some of the services that may be required to deal with traffic or
Right.
spectators, that sort of
I
jazz.
haven't heard of anything, but
Okay.
it doesn't mean that Wade hasn't, and that might be coming out. I don't think there's anything in the 2016 budget, but we're starting to plan our
Yeah.
2017 budget in about 3 months. So yeah,
Awesome.
make sure you talk to Wade, and we'll have to get our
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Sue.
thanks.
Any other questions from committee? No.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. So basically, that's based on assessed values, so that also if your assessments increase, but it's also largely driven by population. And because there was a large growth in Langford is kind of getting the lion's share of the increases for the last year, which hasn't made them very happy. So we'll see. I know, I think Colwood's going to probably grow like with Royal Bay. So that may even out a little bit. But I know we're going to be having a finance committee meeting shortly just to try to see if we can work out and address some of Langford's issues. So we'll be working on that.
Any further questions? There be none. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Okay.
Okay, we'd now like to welcome Julie Lawler from the Chamber of Commerce.
Shall I wait a minute? I'll just take the opportunity before everybody else comes back in just to introduce Bill Stafford, who is from Checks and Balances. He is our bookkeeper, and given that there have sometimes been questions about finances, I thought he would be a useful person to bring along in case there's anything specific. So thank you, Madam Chair, Mayor, Council, and staff for this opportunity to present to you today. I stood in front of you a year ago to present a fee-for-service proposal, and the reason I'm just going to talk to the proposal rather than a slideshow is I think the meat of it is there. I felt that last year our slideshow was a bit more style than substance, and I'd like to just go through this in as much detail as you would care to be honest with you. My sense when I first arrived last year was that there had been a lot of funding which Colwood had very kindly provided to the West Shore Chamber of Commerce, which was based on projects. And last year was a bit of a reframe into a fee-for-service arrangement, which would, I hope you will feel, it was beneficial to both parties, but also represented the funding for the core operations of the chamber, and that's really staff and premises and all of that sort of thing. So I'm coming before you tonight to again request your consideration of a fee-for-service arrangement for $10,000. And I'd just like to talk a bit more to the summary points that I put for what we would be able to provide in 2016. So part of the value of our chamber and any chamber is being able to create a series of network events which support business and community opportunities for people to meet, and also opportunities for business owners to meet with people from across the municipalities. Obviously, these are all of use and open to anyone across the West Shore, but just specifically in terms of events that are happening in Colwood this year, we had a mixer at Pacific Center Family Services Association in February. We had one at Saunders Subaru in January. The one in September will be at Fort Rod Hill and is hopefully on a Thursday rather than a Wednesday, because I know that there have been some scheduling issues with City of Colwood councillors being able to get out to them, so my apologies. And there is also one planned for Royal Bay High School in October. I mean, some of these dates are far enough out that perhaps we can look at what might be adjusted with the host locations to make things easier for you. We are also going to offer a minimum 11 workshops to provide support and training. And this is really about the business development and support part of what we do. We started this kicking off in November. They are free workshops by members, for members. And the idea is just to support the business community that little bit more. The initial one was introduction to coaching, which Councillor Day was in attendance at, so she can speak to that should she care to. It seems to be quite well received, although it's early days yet in terms of both the size of the group and what it's offering. We are, of course, promoting Colwood businesses and organizations and the City of Colwood through our various media channels, so that's social media and also print media. An opportunity for Colwood was also at the Best of the West Shore Awards in October. So although I didn't pick this, I could say I did, but having the Fiskard Lighthouse on the front of the featurette, which went out to 18,000 people, was not a bad thing. And also one of the things that we did work with the Goldstream News Gazette to create was an opportunity for each of our municipalities to say something in support of business community and what was going on. So that seemed to go over well. We're also continuing to work with those of our members who have got things coming up. So specifically in the City of Colwood, obviously you've got the Dwight School development coming up later, and Pacific Center Wellness Center, which is starting imminently. So we are working with them. We do, of course, also play our part in regional and West Shore coordination, so that varies depending on what's going on across the area. But we have been involved in the startup of the South Vancouver Island Economic Development Alliance, and Ken Taylor is going to be wearing a number of hats as he sits on that new board, which just met first thing on Friday. So I've provided an awful lot of detail, which I won't propose to go through unless you would care to, simply because when I came to the meeting last year, I was asked to provide a report on what the Chamber would be doing for the fee-for-service. So I have put together something that reflects on what we accomplished in 2015 and what we hope to do in 2016 in a way that I hope will make the best use of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Does the committee have any questions for Julie? Councillor Day?
Thanks, and thank you very much for providing a careful look at what we did in 2015 and a look to what we would be trying to do for 2016. The one thing that I still don't know that much about with the Chamber is, I'm sure you probably have it somewhere, I just haven't seen it yet, is, you know, kind of a balance sheet in terms of some documentation that supports, now I can't find it readily, but you did say what it costs to run the Chamber for a year, you know, yes, to keep the lights on and pay the rent and your staff to do things. And is that somewhere to be found?
The financial statements here cover the year 2015. I mean, they're draft until they've been reviewed by the accountants. But does that provide you with the detail, or are you looking for something else? No? Okay. so I provided that as part of the package that was sent out. You're welcome. I mean, part of the reason I asked Bill to come is, to be quite honest, I find some of the financial statements interesting to try and go through. It's a standard way of reporting, but I'm basing my figures on actuals and cash flow, so that's why I can speak to that figure with confidence, but when it gets into the statements, it reflects the same thing from a different angle, so Bill can answer any particular questions that you might have about that.
Any further questions? Gordon? Or, I'm sorry. Rob?
Thank you. Since you brought him, I thought maybe he could actually. I did have a fairly look at your balance sheet, and obviously some of it confused me just regarding some of your assets being in a negative. So, for example, I'm looking at your Royal Bank operating account. 2014 it was a negative 79,000, and 2015 it was negative 52,000.
Sorry, I'm not sure where you're looking, because what I've got...
Island Savings. I'm looking on your West Shore Chamber of Commerce
The Island Savings
comparative
checking
balance sheet.
account?
I'm sorry?
The Island Savings checking
Yeah,
account?
correct.
That's what you're referring to? Bill, do you
So
want to speak to
it
that?
kind of confused me that it's an asset, but it's in a negative.
The bank accounts are in overdraft.
Okay.
They've been in overdraft for a couple of years. We do have a GIC that offsets that overdraft. So it's, the bank wouldn't give us the overdraft without any security.
The GIC of 41,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your long-term plan on how many more years do you figure before that is not an overdraft?
I'm going to answer that because she's been doing such a fantastic job. I would anticipate that we'll take care of that this year at some point, because I've actually discussed it with her that the bank charges us more interest on the overdraft than they pay us on the GIC.
Right.
So when that gets to parity or above, and Julie feels comfortable, I'd like to actually look at that.
Okay.
The GIC, we had to renew the term. It comes due again next year, but we have been working from a line of credit which has been gradually reducing, so that's been part of it as well.
And under the same category of assets, you've got the building, which is the exact same amount for 2014, 2015 of 85,447, but then you have I'm assuming that it's an amortization down of 32,000, the line below it.
That's we let the accountants do the year-end accounting entry for that. We have not done the 2015 year-end yet for us to do.
Okay, so that's why those numbers are identical. Okay, and what is your building like? What are we talking about when we're saying that your building, your asset is $85,000? Because is the city of Langford not own the building? Like, is it the furnishings, or where's that?
We have a long-term lease with the City of Langford on the basis of a self-repairing lease, and that's been ongoing for a while. So in terms of the detail on the balance sheet,
It's a mystery.
It's been there as long as I've been there, so I don't know what we actually own part of the building or part of the improvements we've done over the years.
it wouldn't be because we own it. I mean, it may be in part from the improvements, but that's not something I've untangled yet.
Okay. If you could just find out that answer for me, that'd be great down the road. But it's okay that you don't know it right now. Thank you.
Any further questions? Well, there being none, thank you very much, Julie, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the introduction of the 2016-2020 financial plan. Our CAO, Mr. Howlett.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be turning this over to our Director of Finance tonight. Just a couple of quick comments. This first meeting, obviously, is the introduction to the 2016 to 2020 budget process, and of course, we're going to start off with the ever-exciting prior year's performance, so that you've got something to benchmark against when we start talking about the 2016 to 2020 budget. So, having said that, I'll just turn this over to our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Ian.
Well, I actually, this is why you keep me around, find this exciting. Because we did come in pretty close to budget. And I always like to look at, I call it the reality check for council, because we spend an awful lot of time on this coming up with a budget. And if we don't measure actual results to budget, we've kind of wasted our time. It'd be just like kind of coming up with a dream, but how did we really do? So you have a one-page summary there. I'm a bit of a fan of having everything on one page, but there is a lot of information here tonight. And I do have to just remind you that this isn't the actual audit presentation when our auditors come in and they get it sort of right down to the penny, the bottom line. But this tells you a pretty good idea of how did we do, so that when we go forward and start to set our budget for 2016, we know if we need to do any serious changes to what we budgeted for the previous year. So yes, we will be looking at the big picture tonight, and then we will go into some detail on our big expenditures, which is our asset purchases and our special projects. Those are the two biggest items, apart from your core budget where we spend an awful lot of money. So we'll do a separate detailed review on that. So I'm going to just start. We've thought we'd also project it up there. I don't know if you think this is helpful or not. If not, we can always push the screen a little closer because we now have nobody in the audience. Would you like the screen any closer, or are you guys okay? We can bring it a little closer because we don't have anybody whose view we're blocking. That's what we're a bit concerned about. I don't know, Per, if you've got enough room on the leash there to, thanks. Yeah.
Start working your banner.
Okay. We are in the midst, for council's information, we're in the midst of having a new podium created. And the new podium is actually going to have this screen on it, but it'll be lower because right now we're a little concerned it'll either block the view of the camera or of the audience, okay? Yeah. All right, so having got the housekeeping out of the way, let's have a look at how our revenues are shaping up. So right now, our revenue in total was budgeted at 18.6 million. We've come in just a little bit under that, and some of that is basically driven by not doing all the projects or buying all the assets we thought we would do, and some of that is funded by gas tax revenue. So just a reminder, we record the gas tax revenue when we actually go out and purchase the items. So tax revenue itself is over budget, and usually that's right on, but this year we did have a PILT settlement come in. I don't know if I should back away from this a little bit. Okay. Is that about the right distance? Okay. Anyways, I'm not going to mention the amount of the PILT settlement. That was a confidentiality agreement. We signed on that, but what I can tell you is I had a look at what we received from that settlement. I deducted the amount that we will have to refund to ONI as a result of that appeal. And also there was another amount that we will have to refund on housing that basically is subsidized. We have 4 of those folios in Colwood. And the net amount is that we are still to the good about $30,000. So I'm very pleased that at the end of all of that, and then we also had PILT money for the actual 2015 year came in higher than we had budgeted. We're seeing a much better payment rate now on our PILT properties. To follow up on that for council's information, I am scheduling a meeting with the federal government and with the BC assessment authorities to sit down in the same room, make sure everyone is on the same page with how they assess these properties, because I don't want this to be an annual event where we have to go and appeal it. So I'm thinking if we can get them to agree on how they assess properties, it's a good preventative maintenance, you might say. So very pleased to see that revenue came in where it did. Now our next budget meeting is going to be 2 weeks from tonight, and I have managed to persuade Jerry Marola, who's the deputy assessor from BC Assessment, to come and do a presentation. I've given him some specific direction this year so we can get the presentation, tailored as closely as we can to your needs. So that'll be in 2 weeks. Some of the good news there is that our non-market change is up. In other words, the amount of new construction, and we will be focusing on that as we go through our budget, is that we are seeing our user fees starting to pick up. We're starting to see contributions to our amenity and our affordable housing reserves increase as a result of these new developments, and we're seeing increases to things like our road DCCs. This is all very good information. It gives us another source of revenue other than always relying on our taxpayer to pay for some of these things. Which leads me into the next topic of user charges, where we are pleasantly over budget to the tune of about $432,000. And I've given you a bit of a breakdown there just so you can see what contributed to that $432,000. So Michael in the engineering department, I think if you wanted to make any comments on sewer enhancement fees, Michael, I'm not as expert at that, but I know they're about $250,000 over what we had budgeted.
I just remind everybody they can only be spent on enlarging existing fees. And we will have to do a review of how that money is accumulating versus how fast the sewers are getting filled up. And that charge might go up in the future.
Thank you. Sorry, can you just, maybe it's just a misprint or something, but it says permit fees 432,000 over budget. So we're
So that's in total, the total
That's-
revenue? The total revenue on that one item is $432,000 over, yes? The difference between 1.9 and 1.5, et cetera?
Oh, okay, so we're saying it's not just the permit fees, it's all the user charges.
Yeah, and I've given
Okay,
you a
got it.
breakdown. That 432 is the total, and then colon, after that, I give you the individual amounts that contribute to it being over. So I wanted to point out the sewer enhancement fees, because that $250,000 is significant, and considering some of the pressures we may have to expand our sewer, I'm really happy to see that. I told Michael I didn't like the idea of him reducing fees, because us financial types is like one way till the money comes in. So that's a pleasant surprise. We raised a little bit more than planned in our sewer user fees of $52,000. Our planning fees are also pleasantly over budget at $72,000, and that does reflect some of the additional workload in the planning department.
Yes, on the sewer user fees being $52,000 over budget, over how big a budget is that?
That was about $600,000. So what we had done is we actually last year at budget decreased the amount that we were charging for sewer. We decreased it quite significantly, but we have had some additional users join, and so I knew it was going to come up a little bit. And I would recommend to council that when we have these surpluses, we look at putting them into our sewer capital reserve, because we need every dollar that we have as we look at some of those challenges facing us for expanding our sewer.
I would have a bit of an objection to that, as I paid into the sewer capital for 20 years to pay off my part of the sewer, and to be charged again for more sewer capital for Colwood Corners area would be double charging. So I would prefer to see the sewer user fees lowered to I guess 50,000 out of 600 isn't a huge amount, but I would like to see them more in line.
Okay, so for council's information, we did cut the user fees quite dramatically last year. I think it was by about 20%, and some of this is additional users, that's all. But we did pass on a significant savings to those who are paying fees. So if I may, we'll just carry on. So that's the user charges and permit fees. Councillor Day?
Sorry, just on that issue, I just want to remind us to be really careful. It's easier to lower fees once we're really, really certain, because we have had it happen before where we've lowered our sewer user fees and then had to increase them immediately the year following because we didn't quite get it right. And that was much harder, I think, on the taxpayers than if you know, it had been more considered. So I'm all in favor of only charging what we have to charge. But at the same time, I want to, if we do reduce it, I want to be really sure. So I'd be more comfortable personally. I just have to throw my hand up to say I'd like to be really certain. Maybe, you know, maybe we need 2 years worth of data. I'm not sure. But last time that we lowered it based on 1 year's worth of data, the following year it was back up again. So, and it was hard.
I guess that's, in my mind, is part of the question. The other part would be, we don't have it here, is how much has the sewer operating expenses gone up? So to see the extra revenue without seeing how much extra expenditures there were is kind of only one side of the equation.
Okay, so if I may, I'll carry on. Okay. And we may get some answer to Councillor Nault's comment and question there. So fines and penalties, this is a bit of a double-edged sword in that when our taxpayers don't get their taxes paid on time, we hit them with a 10% penalty here, like right off the bat. That's a significant amount of money. And we did this year, after I had attended a collectors meeting with all the other people in the Greater Victoria Regional District, we compared notes and we realized that Colwood kept getting referred to as, well, you guys are different over there. And it wasn't different in a good way. It was that we were charging penalties and interest right at 4:30 if people hadn't physically walked in the door, and not allowing any consideration for people paying electronically online or at the banks. And so we had been charging penalties and interest, and there's a lot of people, it's human nature, a bit of deadline achieving going on. And so we had a reputation out there for being different and not in a good way. And so we have basically said, look, we'll do what our colleagues are doing, which is midnight. You know, you missed the deadline. So there's two things at play here. One is that people are, in fact, paying their taxes in a more timely manner. The other thing is that there was a reflection on our revenue because we were more in step with what our other counterparts are doing, which is actually a little better customer service. But I'm very pleased to see people are paying their taxes in a more timely manner. The other thing that happens in Colwood is we have a little bit different demographic. I don't know what the percentage of the population is that's over 55, but it's considerable. And a lot of people are actually choosing to defer their taxes, which is an option, so that they basically are not paying them. And we see every year more and more people deferring them, which means it's getting in on time through the government. So just a comment there on that one.
Just a question to that, Andrea. So when they defer it, though, eventually we get our taxes, and is it accumulated, all of its back interests and everything all the way forward? I mean,
we do receive the taxes from the provincial government for that year, and then basically the provincial government charges a very low interest rate. So they're acting as we're not holding the liability, the provincial government is in terms of the deferment. Okay, so if I may, we'll move on. Investment earnings, this is just a very minor matter, and right now it looks like we're over budget. But what happens is at year end, according to accounting procedures, we have to take the money we've earned on interest and allocate it to our different reserve funds. So we have quite a few different reserves that, like gas tax is a significant amount of money. There's $2.5 million there. And we're required by the terms of that program to accumulate interest. So the money, we apportion the money to the different reserves, and it probably will come in at about $40,000 that's left in the operating account. We still have the money, but from just the operating account, that's what it'll be.
Sorry, I didn't understand that at all.
Okay.
It showing we've earned 172,000,
And that is correct.
but we only budgeted for 40.
Because we always do year-end adjusting entries to reallocate that to the different reserve funds, and that money doesn't show up as actual interest revenue when we reallocate it to either our deferred revenue accounts, such as gas tax, or to the reserves.
So we're not anticipating that in years moving forward that we would have anywhere near 172,000 because the gas tax money that's sitting in our bank accounts that isn't being spent, once it gets spent, we're not going to earn any interest off that. Is that correct? Is my logic
Well, we
correct?
are actually earning money of 170,000. That's the starting position.
Yeah, no,
but
in years forward.
But the account, we will probably continue to earn money because right now, unless we spend our gas tax money all at once, which I hope we don't do, we will continue. This is about average. I have been actually watching our interest revenue, and we are getting about 1% on the monies that we have on deposit without any restrictions on that in terms of minimal amounts that we deal with the TD Bank. So this is actual revenue that we're booking each year, but we basically aren't allowed to keep it all in the operating. We have to distribute it to the different other accounts.
Saying that, though, then if we're earning 1%, that would suggest that we have 17 million?
Yes, that's about
We have
right.
17 million in our bank? Jeez, great. We, okay.
I shouldn't have told you that. I feel a spending spree coming on.
I would love to see our bank account be a 7%. Never heard that number before.
We have money in different reserves, okay?
But however, like if you look at our last audited statements, last year's audited statement said we had $6 million
In total?
in reserves. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have money in other accounts as well. Would you like to take that offline? Like this,
Sure, no,
there's
no, it's
actually
just-
other
no,
discussion
well,
items here we should look into this evening, if that's okay.
Well, I feel comfortable looking into it. I mean, it's being presented to me. I'm allowed to ask questions about it.
It's just that I can't get all the details right now on that. You're getting into a level of detail that I can't speak to without having done some research.
Make a suggestion?
Okay.
How about if we're meeting again in 2 weeks? I'm sure that's not going to change between now and 2 weeks from now. Why don't we have a little briefing on the city's assets? We also have liabilities, but I think that might be good for all of us.
I've got last year's statements here, if you can just indulge me for a sec here. It's just, we are so busy, it's going to be tough to get to this. So I'm looking in last year's financial statements, cash and equivalents, $13.8 million in bank deposits last year. And we also hold money in the MFA money market fund of $4.1 million for a total of $17.9. So that's just about bang on the 1%.
Does that satisfy the committee for the time being?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. So, hopefully that's good news. Unconditional government transfers. We actually are going to end up at year end with a little more money there than planned. We budgeted $645,000. So far, we have booked $624,000. And I realized today I'd been looking for our fourth quarter casino revenue money of $76,000, and we will be also adding that. So we're going to wind up at about $700,000 on our unconditional government transfers. The main items in there are the small community grant and traffic fine revenues, plus casino revenues. So we budgeted about $300,000 for casino revenue, and we're looking at bringing in about $306,000. So I mentioned that because I know there's been some discussion about perhaps another casino opening, and it definitely is a significant source of revenue here. Conditional government transfers. So I know, Ian, you and I had a bit of a chat about this. This is actually where we budget gas tax money that will be funding various projects and asset additions. And because we have not done all of those projects or additions at this point, we only recognize as revenue when we spend the money. In other words, at this time of the year, we do what are called funding entries, and we've spent, $2 million worth of assets, and so much of that was from gas tax. We go back to what we budgeted last year, and then we record it as a use of that revenue. So basically the difference there is about $1 million in gas tax transfers expenditures we haven't made, which is fine because I've seen the wish list for this year, and I think we've got about 2 or 3 times as much booked as we have available. So there will be a bit of trimming going on before we bring forward the list of capital projects and special projects for council. If you recall, last year at this exact same time, it was our first budget meeting. We didn't have a CAO, and I kind of had to bring forward a bit of an uncut list of all the projects and the assets, and council kind of looked at it and went, well, where do we start, in terms of priorities? So we're working closely with Ian. Staff will be having a meeting this week on Thursday to do some prioritizing on that list, because right now I've got an ask of about $9 million in gas tax over the next 5 years. We have 2.5 right now, and we will be receiving about $700,000 per year over the next 5 years. So that's $3.5 million. Plus the 2.5 we have now gives us 6, and I've got an ask of 9. So we're going to have a bit of a diet on that topic. So just to give you a bit of a flavor of how the pieces fit together this evening, this is important stuff what we're doing, because if we haven't spent it, it's not the end of the world unless it was something critical, and council, of course, will weigh in on that. Developer contributions. This isn't something that we have not been budgeting, but we might want to look at this. And this is money coming into our affordable housing and our amenities reserves. So you will see this when we approve various developments and reports come forward to council. You'll see something called financial implications, right? And in there it'll say how much money that developer is being asked to contribute to these reserves. And they are growing quite nicely. We're about $500,000 in the community amenity one. And so we will be discussing that in more detail about, where that money might be spent. And staff will have a bit of a look at it first, and then we'll bring it forward for your review. But it's good to see these coming in. Again, another source of revenue, not taxation. So that's basically the summary on the revenue side. And on the expense side, if we just look at the total there, I'm very pleased to see that our budget versus actual is pretty close at 16.7 versus 15.7 approximately. And where some of the differences is that the special projects that council approved last year are actually rolled into these various expenditures. So if we haven't made those special project expenditures, and we did budget just over 800,000, we've spent just over 200. So there's about $600,000 that wasn't spent on those projects, and that accounts for almost 600 out of the $1 million in terms of the fact that budget versus actual on expense is about $1 million difference, a little bit more. That's where a chunk of it's coming from. Our different areas, and I've given you just a bit of a flavor for what's in general government. So we've got everything in there, including council, admin, finance, IT, communications, and janitorial, and those ones are bang on budget. Protective services, there's a lot in there, and in total on that one line in summary, we're $285,000 under budget, and that is made up of the fire department being under $91,000. The RCMP are a small amount under at $133,000, and the building department is a little bit under, etc. You can read that, which is what gives us the total under budget of $285 there on protective services. Looking forward, we will probably continue to have a few challenges there. The RCMP budget never shrinks, and each year it does go up. So that's always an area of budget pressure. Engineering services are under budget $664,000, and a fair bit of this is some of the special projects that haven't been done. So there's public works is actually a little bit under budget. Engineering's a little under. 369, that's strictly projects that were not done, and a little bit on operations. Environmental health, which I thought I maybe should give you a bit of an explanation because that's the terminology used, but it's what does that mean? So that's garbage collection, and also here we include our spring cleanup branch drop-off in that. The spring cleanup branch drop-off were a little bit over budget, but I honestly think we had not given them enough in previous years when I looked at what the trend was there. So generally they're right on. Environmental development, a little different from environmental health, in total is under budget by $175,000. And this is basically our planning department, that's environmental development. The main thing contributing to the fact they were under budget is the fact that there was $150,000 in there last year to do a land use bylaw. That hasn't been done. It will be coming forward for council's consideration with probably some modifications, such as in combining it with an official community plan in 2016. They were under in a couple areas and over in another, so as council remembers, we had put money in there for an economic development officer who was not hired. We had put $48,000 in there, so that money was not spent. We will be using it on some other items as earmarked by council from their economic development committee meeting. The legal expenses, through no fault of anyone here, you know, often we're at the receiving end of lawsuits and we have to defend ourselves, and I think council is fairly aware of some of those. We had a $30,000 legal budget, and I think expenses just for planning came in at about $75,000. Like it was pricey. So as we were working on our budget workbooks today, which I'm starting to lose my voice, we've spent the whole day discussing, is we're looking at, you know, making sure we have enough legal budget in the different areas. We have consolidated it for council's information. We used to have a little bit in every department, and it got really hard to keep track of. So we keep a large chunk of it now in the admin department, corporate services. And thanks to our new CAO Ian's efforts, I think he's negotiated a bit of a savings on our legal fees, which is great. So 15% approximately off the rack rates. Thank you, Ian. Don't know that, you know, we can necessarily control how many legal suits we have to defend against. We can try. We are going to be introducing a new parcel tax this year to pay for the new borrowing that council has just authorized for Colwood Central. We are ensuring that we keep a legal budget in the sewer account because that has been a very expensive area in the past with certain groups in Colwood, and so we want to make sure that we protect ourselves there. Sorry, I got off on that, but it's a big topic. You'll hear about it again at budget, is legal fees. Rec, parks, and culture. And I think we have to give a big shout out to the West Shore Parks and Rec for being as fiscally responsible as they are with their budget. When you see them coming in with just, you know, depending on where you live, either a 1 or a 2.5% increase, that's a big budget. In our case this year, it looks like it's 1.1%. So they stick to that. So of the 2.1 million there in that budget, and you'll see we're bang on, you know, we're within, what, $2,000. That's the library as well. They're about 800,000, West Shore Parks and Rec, just under 1.1. And then we also have health and welfare and our parks department in there. So collectively, those budgets probably get the best budget award or best performance award because, you know, they are right on what we were planning there. In terms of utility and enterprise services, this is the cost for our sewer services, and you will see that they are slightly over budget, $22,000. So that actually goes along with the fact that we're a little bit slightly over in terms of our sewer user fees. There's a bit of a correlation there as well. Because what happens is as we have more people hooking up to sewer, there is more expenses for the engineering department to provide that. And Michael, I'm not the sewer expert. If I've got any of my facts wrong, please jump in. Thank you. So I just need a drink of water here. Is there any other questions? Councillor Day?
Thanks. My question was kind of related, to several budgets where we have more revenue than we anticipated. How do we decide when we should perhaps have a reserve fund for that money to go into? Or, there's times when the project just didn't get done yet, but we know it is going to get done, and maybe that's just a carry it over for 1 year sort of scenario. But there's other times when we know that, okay, we were lucky, we didn't have any expenses this year, but next year or 5 years from now, there could be a very large expense, and it would be worthwhile to have a reserve fund in place for that. So I'm just wondering about the difference between those two ways of budgeting.
So when I look at our financial statements, we have something called a reserve continuity schedule, and it's got a lot of different reserves on there. And at the end of the day, as our auditors will remind us, it is all still surplus, however we want to track it. So we do a very detailed job of tracking those reserves. We often, if council specifically wants to earmark something, and I try not to do this for every single item because, I could do this all year round every time somebody doesn't spend all their budget. But you know what? There's lots of times they go over budget too. And so the flip side of that is if you've gone over budget, are we supposed to go find the money in a reserve? Well, we might not have it. So it isn't always logistically possible. So council, in your collective wisdom over the years, has done a pretty good job of setting up different reserves for things that are general topics. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean life doesn't change, and there may be something that you specifically, it's that council direction, right, where you feel that there needs to be a specific reserve. But we have a general unappropriated surplus amount, and then we also have reserves for everything. And there's two things. There's money that we collect ahead of time, like gas tax, that isn't called a reserve. It's called deferred revenue. In other words, the revenues come in, but we haven't actually spent it yet. Whereas a reserve is savings that we have earmarked. And especially in the sewer surplus, we definitely have a couple things there. Council has established fleet reserves, which I think are very wise, so that when we need to replace equipment, we've tucked away some money there because we're going to get to this, but debt is a concern for us all. We really don't want to have to add more, and if we see that we are building some surpluses, and it looks like we will have a little more than planned this year, that's something that council can look at, and you may decide you want to restock your fleet reserves, or you'll see this when we work our way through budget where there's need, where there is money and where there isn't. That I have to give you a general answer, Councillor Day.
No, it's good. I just want to follow up that then we probably could rely on you to let us know when you think a new reserve fund should be established.
I think you have a lot right now, and one of the items, for instance, we've been grappling with at budget. I'm sorry, this is a non-technical term, Michael. It's a septic sucker truck. So, if you've ever watched the Red Green show, we actually need to replace the septic pumping truck. I don't know the proper name, but it's like $500,000. And we do a Vactor. Thank you. Thank you. So we do need to replace it, and $500,000 is a lot of money. So then staff will be looking at that. Do we buy it, or do we lease one, or there's different ways of solving it. But that's an example of a $500,000 item, and I've only got $115,000 in the reserve, right? So some of those things council will be looking at, because that's one of the things I was trying to work on in between meetings today, is bringing forward a full look for you at what we have in those reserves and in those deferred revenues, because that's what funds these different projects and equipment replacements and all of that.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to comment that reserves and reserve funds are probably the most effective way for municipalities to become resilient to unforeseen changes that might hit them. And the best way council can improve a municipality's resiliency is through setting policy around the establishment of reserves and having reserve target balances. So eventually, once we get cleaned up and get caught up with the way our finances are done, we will be talking with council about establishing some reserve fund policies around target balances, and that means target balances whether they're too high or too low. So we may have some balances that are already too high. We might have some that are significantly deficient, but we don't know that yet. So we will be dealing with that at some point in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I think council has heard my concerns since I've been on board here for a year and a half, was just to actually ensure that we had financial statements that were accurate. And so we're getting there. But progress is never as quick as we would like it to be. So I'm going to move on now. And I want to talk very briefly about debt, because that's a big topic. We had budgeted for $2.2 million for debt last year, and $1 million of that was going to be for the Colwood Central, which didn't proceed last year, but it will this year. And as you know, that was a big, very nasty topic we've been cleaning up, is the 4.5 debt issuance, which it looks like is now on the CRD agenda. And that $4.5 million debt issue should be happening this year, which will allow us to proceed with the final construction of the main sewer trunk line. Michael, help me out. And also the pump station. Is that going to happen all this year, or is some of that going into next year?
The line will be built this year.
Yeah.
In the summer, and the pump station will perhaps start by the end of the year, but certainly most of it will be built next year.
Okay. So we will get the borrowing in place. We're in the process right now of getting our ducks in a row for a counter petition. We have to do that before we can create a parcel tax. So that parcel tax, based on the timeline, will not kick in until next year. So we will have to go 1 year without that parcel tax in place while we do the counter petition process and make sure we get that done accurately. So in terms of debt, trying to anticipate perhaps a question on that is, I had a look at something called our liability servicing limit, and I'm looking at Councillor Rob over there because I think this is something that you might be interested in. When we take on more debt, we have to complete like a liability servicing certificate, and we have to forward that along with our application to MFA, because that's their job, is to make sure we're not getting in over our heads. And one of the good things about the Provincial Government Ministry website, you can actually go in there and pull this data up on any municipality in BC, and they keep track of what revenue they consider is sort of reliable that comes in every year. Generally speaking, it's our tax revenue. So when I looked at what they use, is they look at, okay, Colwood, according to provincial estimates, last year had 18.2 million, and then they basically take 25% of that as our liability servicing limit. So it's about 4.5 million. And what that means is that's not how much we can borrow, that's the cost of borrowing. It's no different than taking out a mortgage at home. They look at what your income is and they go, we think you can afford to pay 30% of your income or whatever to service that debt. So in this case, they look at 25% of our regular annual income. That's what we think you can afford. And then we have to list what we currently pay to service our debt. So we put in there what we were paying to service our debt that was in existence before we took out the new $4.5 million. What's that going to cost us to service it? And when the dust settles, we've basically used just over half of our liability servicing limit, okay? So right now, our annual costs are about $2.4 million out of a total approved of 4.5, just to give you a bit of an idea. Because I think these are key numbers. I know when our auditor presents the financial statements, he always looks at this, the difference in net debt. Okay. Is there any questions on that? Because that's kind of that's a big item. So the other things that you have in front of you here is, Councillor Day? Oh,
Sorry, I followed you on the 2.4 million is the annual cost of our borrowing. That's what we.
That's what
the
we
cost
pay
that we
now
incur.
to service the debt, yeah.
And that includes both the principal and the interest payments?
That is correct as far as I know, yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so that we're at about half?
Yeah, just a little over, yeah.
And something that you said right before that about the CRD and debt limits and something about 4.5, I didn't understand.
Okay, so council's just approved the additional borrowing of 4.5. If you recall, we've had about half of that in so-called temporary borrowing for 16 years, which is not a good situation, to put it mildly, with MFA. It's not legal. And so we've now been able to go ahead and proceed with that. We've been sort of waiting for different things to happen so we could get that happening. We've now managed to consolidate various bylaws and got all the paperwork in order. It was a big job. That's been done. And it's on their agenda, and as far as I know, it's going forward. Okay. Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrea, of the remaining debt that we have on the books, how much is it, of it is sewer related?
Let me just have a look here. You know, I would have to look that one up. That's a tough one. We have a fair bit of debt for equipment. So, for instance, we did borrow between this year and last on the new firefighting equipment, T-Rex. That was $1.35 million. That was a big chunk of it. And we also have some other equipment out there. So if you like, we can...
Yeah, I was just curious because when Sue was here, she had mentioned something about retiring the debt from the pool. And so we got a bit of a rebate.
Yeah, we do have debt as well on the, it was called Bear Mountain, it's now the Q Center, right? You will recall we lost a bit of money rather suddenly last year in terms of Langford's subsidy on that. Yeah. So we do have debt on that arena. Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, we can get into that if you like in more detail, either at budget or it will come up also at audit when we're looking at our actual debt, because the thing that I do like to draw council's attention to, because some of this seems like a lot of numbers, and I have really tried to streamline it onto one page tonight so that I can focus you on some of the things that matter, which is if we look at add long-term debt, and there's two figures there. We budgeted 2.2 million. We've incurred basically 1.2, which was the new T-Rex firefighting equipment. And then if we look just a couple lines below where it says principal payments on debt, we like to see that. We budgeted 926, so this is like paying down your mortgage at home. And we've paid down 895. And then I look at the difference between what was the new debt we took on versus what we paid off, right? So if we took on actual 1.2 million, but we paid down 900,000, we had a net increase still in our debt last year of 300,000. Now, having said that, we were planning on budgeting a whole whack more, which will kick in this year when that debt is approved by the CRD. Those are a couple key things for council to be aware of. No different than transfers from and to reserves, because when I was reviewing the budget last year, one of my concerns was that there was a very large removal of funds from reserves, and that was how the budget was balanced, was $500,000 was pulled out somewhat arbitrarily in the process of doing this. And I always like to draw council's attention. How much money are we putting into reserves versus how much are we taking out? Because that's a key difference. And so far this year, at the very bottom line, we're looking at a bit of a surplus there. Now, that will probably change a little bit, but still, that difference, if we're running a surplus, is where we would like to put that back into reserves, right? As CIO Ian was saying, we like to make sure that's how we stabilize ourselves, is that we do that. So, I'm sorry, I just wanted to talk a bit about debt and those transfers. The transfers to reserves, at this point, we've basically made what we budgeted for. But if it turns out that because we didn't do some of the expenditures we were planning on resulting in a surplus, then that money can either stay in general surplus, surplus is surplus, it's not going anywhere, or it can go into reserves. Okay. So that takes us to the next section, which has the final report. And that is the acquisition of tangible capital assets. So I haven't given you a lot of explanations here because there is a separate report for that. And I actually have just handed out a printout this evening just to make it a little bit easier for you to reference. So actually, you know, it's good when we budget to spend the money when we do spend most of it, because otherwise, you know, we're not executing, right? So we plan to spend $2.3 million on our asset purchases, and we've actually spent just over $2 million. And, you know, the fire department gets bonus points there. I wanted to comment that when we budgeted, I see Chief Carey over there, we budgeted for the full amount of the fire truck, but we realized after the fact, when you see an actual in there of 1.4 versus a budget of almost 1.6, we had booked the 10% down payment last year of about $160,000. So that was actually recorded in last year. So we've actually come in on budget collectively over the 2 years. It was very complicated. MFA told us it was the most complicated lease they have ever done, and this is somebody who'd been there 30 years, because we first took out one lease for the down payment of $160,000. We took out a second lease when it was half constructed for another $800,000. Then when the thing was finally done, there was another lease, and then we took all three of them and rolled them into one. And we were very busy with MFA sorting that out. But it all got done, truck's here, and the bills are being paid. So that was a big one this year. So if I could then just maybe get council to turn your attention to the special projects and tangible capital assets. So that's the sheet that I've handed out. You have seen this report before, but there's a reason for it to come forward tonight. So on here, what we've done is we've updated the actual expenditures for 2015 compared to budget. I have not had the time or the ability to go through and update the manager's comments, but these were made at the end of October, early November, in terms of where they thought they would come out for the year. And I'm hoping that you have a few questions for perhaps Michael to give me a bit of a break before I lose my voice, but there's a number of things that you may have a few comments on. What I will share, first of all, on the first page, the top half, we budgeted to spend $817,000 and change, and we have spent $226,000, and there is various reasons for that, why that happened or did not happen. And then the bottom half, I think we've actually covered a fair bit of that, but there's a bit more detail there for the capital purchases that got done or that didn't get done. So if we could just get you to, we'll go over to the next page there where we go by department, and I don't want to read this out. I know you've had a chance to look at it, and I'm going to sort of turn it over to council if you have some questions or comments.
Are there any comments or questions from committee for Andrea at this time? Councillor Day?
Sorry, just all I can tell you is that without some input from the people whose area of specialty it is, I can't recall from the top of my head you know, what was the special project in IT? Or I don't, I can see that there's a lot of things that we didn't get to getting done.
But you do have the details on the following pages.
Oh, are they on the following ones?
Yes.
Okay. This is the one that I didn't get to today, so I'm sort of in the dark.
No, this does list each actual project. So here, let's just quickly have a look. Communication is the first one. A number of these projects, for various reasons, were not done. The Community Wellness Initiative, for example, Council decided to pull that one at their strategic planning session, so that one did not get done, just as an example. The waterfront branding and promotion of $30,000, that was signage, and I know that it is now complete. I think Sandra had a bit of delay getting that done. The citizen survey has just been done in January. As you know, some of these were carried forward for various reasons. So that was that department. Admin, special projects, basically, we got a number of things done this year, including, thank you, PER, installation. Some of this, I know PER was behind the underfloor conduit, the cabling. You know, there's been a lot of work done in the chamber. That's been finished. The Heritage Archives and Energy Assessment, that one has not been completed, and I believe in conversation with Marcy will be carried forward. Again, we can get into these when we're doing the 216 stuff, but this is just to give you a snapshot of how did we do last year. Corporate admin, there we go, the carpet, the tile, et cetera, at City Hall, a little bit over budget, but hey, this was a big project. We finally got the carpet down here. That's been, I think, in here for about 3 years, so got done. Some furniture got purchased, and the Emergency Management Ops Center, I know there was a bit of a hold up there, but that has been completed now, I believe. Per, you're here if you want to make any comments on IT. There was a lot got done in IT. We got a new backup server for about $12,000 where it says engineering, EOC, mapping, laptop. When we had our emergency ops exercise here, we were still using maps, and we said, gee, we should maybe get into at least the 20th century and get everything on GIS, like on maps and that. We've now purchased a computer, which was in the budget. That got done. So that was IT special projects, and then underneath that you'll see there was also some capital projects. One of the biggest that has been largely completed is the fiber optic to City Hall. They're just now in here installing switches and running some cables, and this is exciting. This is going to give us all a lot better communication instead of beaming me up Scotty's signals up over Triangle Mountain where we have a repeater on someone's roof. Not ideal. So we'll be able to get rid of that. We'll be able to use the fiber optics between here and the fire hall and Public Works, and will allow for much better communication to Langford. And Per, I'm not the expert, if you want to add any comments. Okay. Okay.
I'm happy to answer any more detailed questions. The things we did not do this year were basically some of the applications with money in there for enhancing the City View, SharePoint, and a little bit of the financial system. We did not get to those, and that's partly because we're reassessing the priorities, and we've removed things, consolidated them around, and you'll see when we look at 2016 that there's a real emphasis on being efficient in the use of funds.
Yeah. So that was kind of the IT area. Bylaw, as any of you who know, they're very pleased with their new Tahoe. Light bar, lights, horns, and signals. It got done. I think there was just some outstanding equipment attachments, but it's basically done. Planning we touched on earlier, and that is the land use bylaw. Has not got done, and there'll probably be a little bit of rethinking of how that's going to get done, so stay tuned. That will be coming forward to you. Over the page, building. This was one of those difficult ones where you're almost afraid to ask the question about what kind of shape is City Hall in the event of an earthquake. And, you know, we did get some scary answers back. Apparently the safest place to be is here in the committee room if the ground starts to shake. The rest of City Hall isn't in very good shape. So there will be some reports coming forward to council in terms of, do you want to do more additional studying? This was just sort of a quick look at the state of the building that we did. That got done. Under fire prevention, capital projects, acquisitions, we have Fire Chief Carey here, and I don't know if you have any comments, Carey. It looks to me like you got everything done that you had planned on.
Thank you. Yes, everything was done. The washrooms were rolled over into this year and completed at the end of 2015. Those were 100% complete. The phone chair is just been rebuilt by our mechanic, and other than a few tags to go on with certain valves, that is complete. And of course, we have in our possession the two racks, which is
Okay, thank you. So I'll probably turn any comments that you might have, Michael, over to you in terms of, so in the engineering section that follows, there were quite a few special projects budgeted for 546, completion of 177, and some of these will be carried forward. So, Michael, do you have any comments you'd like to make on that section?
Well, you know, underspending isn't always a bad thing. For instance, the bridge project came in so low that we actually did it out of regular maintenance, and that's why there's no expenditure there. All of them that are complete under budget, I think, are noted except for the bridge inspections. That is, the work for 2015 is complete under budget, and the money in that budget's being moved over to work that was planned for next year anyway. That's the bridge repairs. Bridge inspections is complete, and there's no money in again until I think 2018 when the next inspection is scheduled. Some of them, like the risk mitigation, that was all planned to be completed by Christmas, and the materials didn't turn up. The supplier has apologized profusely. Materials are now here, and that will be completed. The rainwater management master plan has fallen victim to other things coming up. This in particular has been a year for developers behaving badly for some reason, and that absorbs a lot of our time, as does the increase in planning work. For every piece of work that planning does, we tend to, you know, have an equal amount of work, and that's particularly true because we've had these three projects that failed that are being revived, and unfortunately I carry most of the memory of what went on when those were originally created. So I'm constantly being called upon to supply that. I don't think there's anything else there that I particularly need to comment on. The subdivision development servicing bylaw, which we're all longing to complete, the vast majority of that work is being done by staff, and that is well on, and we expect to bring the first section TMPI for review shortly. The carbon offset funds, I should mention that one. No work was done on that because one of the bidders came through with an unexpected proposal, which would see all of that work being done in 1 year within the budget instead of in 5 years. we were interested in that proposal, and we needed to check it out very carefully to make sure that this was real. It does appear it's real, and we're just finalizing the details in a contract now. And amazingly, we will get the 5 years' work done out of the 1 year's budget. So that's good to know. But I'm certainly prepared to answer any other questions you may have about these projects.
Councillor Knull?
Just out of curiosity, the year-to-date actual, is that effective as of December 31st for all of these projects?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Day?
Thanks. Just a question for you, Michael, on the coastline erosion plans and implementation. We had budgeted 75,000. We've spent roughly a third, and it appears that it's being carried forward to 2016 for a phase 2 approach. Is that phase 2 different than what we had looked at before, or the same?
Well, there's two parts to the coastline erosion. I mean, it says study, but in fact, there's, you do a study of one particular, one of the assets on the coastline, and then there's possibly an amount of work that needs to be done to protect that asset. We'll see as we go along. But so the look at the first one, the pump station, is complete bar the last little bit of public consultation, which is just with the neighbors to the pump station, because obviously they might be concerned that work we do will intrude into their sightline, and so they need to be consulted. When all of that consultation is in, then we will go to committee with the results of the consultation, which include in some cases different ideas from the public, and a proposal for what the solution should be to the problem, or options, and then committee and council to decide what should be done with it. Tentatively, we have put in $250,000 in the budget, plus another 50,000, so 300 total to protect the pump station, which is far more than I had anticipated it would be. I've already got $125,000 off that, but in discussions with the consultant about different ways of doing things, and I'm still working on reducing that further, or it might just be postponing part of it. It probably will be. But anyway, all of that will be presented in the options to committee once the final consultation is done. Now, the next phase would be looking at the next piece of the coastline, the next asset that we need to look at, and so that'll be a separate study, and then repairs or not might come out of that. And in any of these cases, you've always got the choices of protect or retreat, or abandon. And with the pump station, the retreat, in other words, move the pump station option, doesn't look like a wise use of funds. And but in another case, it might be, or abandonment might be the inevitable outcome. So we'll see in each case. So you don't really know what the future budget's going to be for these protection works or otherwise until we've had the study done.
Right. So I guess then it would be appropriate that the money that's in the budget just be carried forward at this point in time until a different recommendation comes forward through the process.
Well, essentially, the money to complete the design works needs to be carried forward. What happens in terms of actual physical work depends on
Any further questions?
I just had one comment. Michael, under the new DCC bylaw, just for clarification, was that road DCCs or what kind of DCC bylaw was that? You had 70,000 in there and we haven't spent any yet. So what type of DCC was that?
That was road DC.
We were looking to redo it? Okay.
If we can, we'll also introduce a stormwater DCC
Okay.
in order to help pay for the rainwater management plan.
Okay. This is an important topic for council because we are starting to see some significant revenues flowing in the form of road DCCs, but I don't know as much about this as Michael does, but we can only levy DCCs for those roads that were initially in the establishing bylaw, and that could be why it's time to review the bylaw as Colwood grows, right? Yeah, so that's why this is an important item.
And this is going to be a lot cheaper than 70,000.
Good.
Establish that for sure.
Okay.
We won't see that in the budget.
Okay, great. So then the next section is just a brief summary of some of the capital projects. And the bicycle parking, I just would point that out, that was over at West Shore Parks and Rec, I believe, the bike parking.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's completed. Yeah.
There's just a monument to erect to the donators.
Yeah. So a lot of this you will see coming forward in the either special projects or capital for 2016. So I think that's, unfortunately, if we go over the page, the last page was scanned in sideways. I think that was just to see if you were awake here as we have to turn this, and it's sideways everywhere. So for your information, Public Works did a very good job in terms of basically executing their projects. So we did buy a new crane truck this year. It looks like it's a bit over budget, but we did sell off the old one for about the amount of the overage, so they basically came in bang on that one. They did do a major HVAC replacement here at City Hall, which does allow for a little bit better airflow, heating and cooling, although this is a very difficult building to get any kind of even heating and cooling in. And they also got us a new garbage truck, and they do a fabulous job of recycling over there. I think they took the chassis of the old truck, the engine, and that was still in good shape. They took the box off, and they turned the old garbage truck into a flat deck at not a lot of extra cost. So we still have another useful vehicle out of it. So kudos. You know, it's kind of nice at budget that we don't just say, oh gosh, boring, horrible. There's some really neat things that are happening out there with our staff pitching in and being really creative, and it's really neat to see that. Sewer, gosh, that's not quite as exciting because I know you all spend a lot of time on that. We didn't do the central sewer expansion. We've talked about that. That is going ahead. The Matilda and Islet Place, there has been some money spent, and the good news there, Michael, I believe, is it's not going to cost us as much as we had originally budgeted, right? Matilda and Islet Place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the bills just, the work and the bills are just coming in January. That's why we don't see the numbers there. And then the final item is money that had been set aside for sewage treatment and resource recovery. And we've sort of are looking at capping that at $350,000. So if we've spent $166,000 this year and whatever it was for last year, we're looking at bringing forward to council just the difference for now, because this is a topic that I think between Michael and Ian, they can give you some more information on when we get to it. But that's just a bit of a report about what happened in 2015.
Any questions from committee members? There being none, thank you, Andrea. The next item on the agenda is our next meeting, Monday, February 29th.
Right, at 5:30.
Mm-hmm.
And
So, call for adjournment? All those in favor?